Okay, we are live. All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, welcome everyone. This is our first live event. We're thrilled to launch this monthly series as a space for us to gather, share insights, and collectively engage with this growing community. I'm Michael Barnett, Partnerships Manager for Dharma Dr, and I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers. So first, our CEO and founder, Brad Mosell, who's leading Dharma Doctor's vision and innovation in the therapeutic and mental health space. Also joining us is Dr. Amy Serin, Chief Clinical Advisor at Dharma Doctor. Dr. Serin is an internationally recognized neuropsychologist and stress expert, best-selling author of The Stress Switch, and founder of the Serin Centers, a network of integrative care clinics blending neuroscience and psychology. Dr. Serin is the clinical mind behind Touchpoints, and her expertise and ongoing research in this space has been instrumental in Dharma Doctor's development. Today's session will begin with a 30-minute exploration of bilateral stimulation and some new research on how our tabs are helping people manage stress and improve focus. After that, we'll open the floor for a live Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions in the live chat throughout the discussion. And Brad, over to you.
I want to say thank you to everybody that's joining us this morning. This is really cool. It's been a goal of ours to have one of these community events from the get-go, and it's finally great to see kind of all of it come together. So thank you all for coming out. As a quick piece of housekeeping, this is our first attempt, and we're trying some new platforms here. So we're going to explore this and see how it goes, but it may change in the future. But yeah, Dharma Doctor, I founded Dharma Doctor about 3 years ago, and it came out of a desire to make clinical level resourcing more available in some non-clinical environments. I was working as a teacher at the time for pregnant and parenting teens at a school, and had experience with EMDR, had experience with bilateral stimulation, and wanted to build a device that we could use to bring those level of resourcing into these non-clinical environments. Simultaneously, we wanted to build a better device for therapists to utilize in clinic, a premier tool that kind of took bilateral stimulation into the 21st century. And it's been a journey. It's been a journey. I assume some of the people on the call have ordered tabs or had tabs from that very first batch. So to all of those early beta users, thank you for joining us and thank you for your support. There's also probably some people on the call who have never actually seen the tabs or are more interested in just sort of generally what we do and what we offer. So I wanted to give a quick second just to kind of show the technology in its current form and demo it. And then the goal here is, I'm going to show this for a couple minutes, and then Dr. Serin's going to give a little presentation. But then we really want to open up to Q&A. We want these to be a community forum where we can talk about what's working, questions you might have about the bilateral stimulation, and also about what you'd like to see for the company in the future. Our mission is to help produce the most effective and accessible tools for memory reprocessing and stress reduction. And in order to do that, we can only do that with the support of the community. So we're really interested in what everyone has to contribute. But for those who have not seen the tabs, this is currently what they look like. We have this case. You open up and we have the two bilateral stimulation tabs. Pull them out. They turn on automatically. And then once they're on, we can start and have immediate control. You can control the speed and the intensity from the units themselves. So we've got 3 different settings: manual control, 2 different intensities directly here, and then it goes back to sort of standby. Additionally, we have the Dharma Doctor app, which enables the greater control of the tabs. So we have, some additional features. You can adjust speed and intensity with up to 10 settings. Again, you can control them from the tabs. We have the ability to do remote access. So for those who are interested in using these for telehealth, the remote access is a pretty amazing feature that's still being still underutilized in a lot of ways. But if a client has a pair of tabs, you simply go into remote access. It's on the More page. So you go to More, you click remote access, And then as the therapist, you would put generate code, and it'll generate a PIN code, a 4-digit PIN. So you would go continue. Now, for the client, it's the exact same process, except they would go enter PIN, and they would enter that 4-digit PIN. And when you're linked up, it allows you to then control those tabs remotely from anywhere in the world. We already have therapists doing remote sessions all the way from Spain to the US. And we're seeing this enable tactile bilateral stimulation remotely in a way that it previously was unavailable. And Dr. Serin's going to talk a little more about the importance of that. But this is a really cool feature that we hope more people will utilize. Additionally, you can control multiple tabs simultaneously. So for those in the community that are interested in exploring group EMDR protocols, there's more and more research coming out. These tabs enable that. So one controller can control multiple sets simultaneously. I am really excited about what that means for the scalability of EMDR and its ability to engage larger populations simultaneously. And we're looking for clinicians that are also really interested in exploring and expanding that role of bilateral stimulation. So if you are one of those clinicians out there today and you are interested in doing group protocols, please reach out. We would love to talk to you. The last thing on the app that I will share, today is that we have some video content from a couple of our key partners, Travis Goodman and Rebecca Case. And they've both been kind enough to help us put together some of these early grounding exercises that can be used independently to help with the stabilization process utilizing the bilateral stimulation. We want to expand the library of videos that we have inside the app. We're constantly excited and looking to increase the different ways that this message can come across in the different exercises that could utilize bilateral stimulation independently. And so if you are interested in collaborating on video content, please reach out. We're going to put our email in the chat, but the best email to reach is probably partnerships@dharmadoctor.com. That's the key contact, and we can then figure things out. But would love to hear from anybody that's interested in exploring greater content development as well. But with that, I think we're going to hand it over to Dr. Serin. We'll talk a little more at the end, and I'll be available for the Q&A. We're really excited to explore some of the research that Dr. Serin's put up. Dr. Serin has been an incredible resource in this whole development process. So we're really lucky to have her on board. She's a mentor as well, and can't wait for what she has to say. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Brad. And it's so nice to have all of you here. This platform is interesting because we can't see your faces, and there's so many of you on the call. And anyway, I'm sorry I can't see your faces, but thank you for being here. I started really getting into bilateral stimulation when I became an EMDR therapist about 15 years ago. And then in 2015, was doing some consulting for some ex-military that was responding to the Ebola crisis. And we couldn't get EMDR therapists out to help prevent PTSD or treat PTSD post-Ebola. So I knew something was going on with the wired bilateral stimulators that we had. And I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we had a wireless form of this, because we can deploy at least, the vitamin C from the orange, so to speak, or this active ingredient. And at the time, no one really knew what bilateral stimulation was doing. And so I did a lot of, lit review and kind of came up with, okay, wait, this is doing something more than I think clinicians are even aware of. Because when we were trained in EMDR, they said, oh, well, you can do auditory, you can do eye movements, or you can do this. But each form of bilateral stimulation is doing something distinct in the brain. So because our clinics do EEGs and neurofeedback, I started quantifying what this was really doing in the brain. And it was remarkable how quickly this change was. I was showing these doctors, experts and pioneers in the field of neurofeedback, hey, look at this before and after. And they were just astounded. They said, how many neurofeedback sessions did this take? 30, 40, 50? Like, what did you do? What, amazing thing did you do over 2 years or a year to get this effect? And I said, this is a 5-minute difference. And first, no one believed me, and that was okay because I can prove it in other ways. But it was really profound, and I wasn't even as I really couldn't even believe it too. I mean, it was just unbelievable and remarkable what this was. So today I'm going to get a little heavy. Okay. So I'm going to warn you. I know a lot of you are therapists on the call, but if you're not a therapist or a researcher, I just want to let you know this is pretty heavy scientifically in the beginning, but if you could get through that, it'll get lighter towards the end. So I'm actually going to present to you the research that underpins the use of bilateral stimulation and why certain things don't work when we're using bilateral stimulation, like why, it's better when it's given to you and in a form of vibrations versus tapping, or getting it, having a device versus tapping yourself, things like that. So I'll go through all the background research, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A so that we can get practical in terms of how these tabs can help you in your life, you in the clinic, and if you're a therapist, your patients as well outside of the office, and why it's safe to do so. So Michael, if you could start the slide presentation, we'll get down into the nitty-gritty. So why do we use this tactile bilateral stimulation in EMDR? Well, what I found in the research is that if you're just doing eye movements can be very activating. But if you add the tactile stimulation in the tabs actually is reducing the nervous system's stress response. And so there's a lot of research that shows this, that has been done over the years. So the first one on the left is that in EMDR, this study found a significant improvement in memory retrieval with the tactile bilateral stimulation and eye movements together. And this makes sense. When you're in fight or flight, all non-essential functions shut down, and that includes memory. This is why if you take a test and you're very nervous, you're not going to remember the answers. As soon as you get out of the test and you start to calm down, your fight or flight or your stress switch lowers down into a reasonable number. If you think of the stress switch as being from 0 to 10, right? You're at an 8 or a 9 when you're taking the test, and you come out of the test, you go down to a 4. Now your memory comes back online. So it makes sense that when we apply tactile bilateral stimulation like the Dharma Dr tabs, it's going to improve memory retrieval, because anytime you are heightened and your stress switch is high, when we lower it, all of these wonderful things come back online. Your empathy, your ability to think clearly, your cognitions, your memory, those all come in line. And so the memory piece has been established in this study. And the second study showed that actually, we're back on the first slide. Yeah. The second one is that there's a significant difference in alternating the stimulation versus continuous. So when you say, well, why can't we just, like babies have those vibrating, chairs, why can't we just sit on something vibrating? Well, there's a distinct mechanism when we alternate the bilateral stimulation, and there can be all kinds of reasons for that I won't get into in this talk, but bilateral stimulation has a distinct effect from continuous, and that applies to auditory and tactile stimulation. And incidentally, when we're testing auditory stimulation, this seems to be the inferior kind of stimulation for you EMDR therapists that use auditory tones. It can be pleasant, but the auditory cortex is not contralaterally designed the same way that the somatosensory cortex is. So I never use auditory stimulation. And even though people like it, it doesn't produce the same effect. So just knowing what you're doing in sessions neurologically versus preference wise, or what you're used to using, I think is important. And then there's a really great study, and this is the third one on this slide, where there's a multi-channel near infrared spectroscopy study that shows increased oxygenation when using bilateral stimulation in the tactile. And so they also found that this people can recall more pleasant memories. It emotionally regulates them, and they have more comfortable feelings. That's very important, because we all know there's mood congruent memory. When I'm in a state of hyperarousal, what happens is, I can't think of the good things, right? And I can't override with my cognition things. So we're getting things backwards in cognitive and behavioral therapy, in terms of telling people, you've got to think positively and then you'll feel better. No, you need to feel better and then you'll think positively. And that's exactly what the tabs do, is they lower the stress switch. Then those things are very, very accessible. The pleasant memories, the positive cognitions, all the things we tell people to do in CBT. We have to get in the right state to access those. And then once we're in the right state, we're off to the races. Next slide, please. Okay. So we also know that in EMDR, when you're using the eye movements plus the bilateral stimulation, it creates significant depotentiation and in the fear memory synapses in the amygdala. So when I'm doing teletherapy, I only use the bilateral stimulation and the eye movements together. I never just do eye movements alone. And even in my office, I don't do eye movements alone. And the reason is because that can be very stimulating. And without the tabs before, during, and after session, you really can flood people. And this is when people do EMDR and they go, I don't like this. EMDR still is working for them. But what happens is sometimes when you access this content and people flood, then it's kind of like just like flooding when we're trying to do exposure with response prevention, where you're flooding someone with all this stress and then they don't like it. And then their nervous system is signaling them to avoid it in the future rather than allowing their nervous systems to calm down. And that's the magic of the tabs. We also know, obviously, most people have heard of the amygdala. This is kind of part of the network that controls stress and modulates it. And this has connectivity into the sensory inputs, the fear response. And this is really important because we think about, what causes stress? A lot of people think it's thoughts or cognitions and that we're sort of driving the stress switch in the body, but we're not. It's actually the sensory network. And that's very important when you think and start making the connections of why do these tabs work? Otherwise, it feels like a little hocus pocus, right? But it's actually the sensory network, the salience network that's modulating this. And then this is very important. The last thing on the slide is that the tactile stimulation affects a discrete part in the amygdala that auditory stimulation does not affect. Okay, so only tactile stimulation activates the ventrolateral amygdala. And this is very important because when we're looking at the mechanisms of actions of how we're going about our therapy or how we're going about just using things that are going to lower our stress as we go about our daily lives, it's very important to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to pick something inferior or you're not, or you're going to miss opportunities to use this to really help out. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a very complicated slide, but basically the mechanism of action here is through the salience network. This is the network in the brain that integrates all the sensory information, and it decides what to do with your stress switch. So if an alarm went off right now, we'd all go into fight or flight before we even knew why or what or whatever. And most people think, oh no, we're making this conscious appraisal of it first before, and that's why we're getting stressed out. We see a stick or we see a snake and then we go, oh, it's a snake, and we get scared. No, you see a snake, you go into fight or flight, and then you make the cognitive appraisal. So this bottom up, this low road back of the brain and integrated process is how these tabs work, because it adds a sensory input that downgrades the stress switch. And consciousness can raise and lower your stress at times, but we all know we've been in those situations where we're flooded and we're in fight or flight, and we try to think to ourselves, I know I'm okay. Like, why is my heart pounding and what's going on? And you cannot override it with your conscious mind. If it's too high, you can at moderate levels, but not at intense levels, because those mechanisms are shut down in the moment you're not in the right state. So this can put your brain in the right state. And I'll show you in a moment how it does it very quickly. Next slide. So this is the one of the first studies that I actually published in the Journal of Biotechnology and Biomedical Science. So this is an N of 1,084, by the way. And for those of you who've done research, that's quite a bit. That's quite a lot, huge sample. And using the bilateral stimulation for 30 seconds reduces your subjective units of distress by 63%. And what that is basically, hey, how stressed do you feel right now in this moment? And then we activate the tabs, and then 30 seconds later say, okay, now how stressed out do you feel? And so the average in the beginning was about 7.5, and it went down to under a 3 in 30 seconds. The other thing we do in EMDR, right, is we get a body sensation. Where do you feel this stress in your body? And if you're stressed out to more than a 3, out of 10, you're usually going to feel something in your body. Most often it's stomach, then the second is chest, and then sometimes it's head and shoulders and back and, tight muscles and things like that. But basically, it's how intense is that body sensation? And the average was a little more than a 5, and that went down to about 2.5 in 30 seconds. Okay, this was a non-clinical sample. Sorry, and it was heterogeneous. And this was published in 2018. This is remarkable, and so we've replicated this in multiple ways with men. We've done it in women. We've done it in older adults. We've done it in teenagers. We've done it in multiple samples of people, and we get a similar result each time, ranging from about 72% stress reduction to about 58% was the lowest in the studies. Next slide. The power of EMDR is after 6 90-minute sessions, about 100% of single trauma survivors were no longer met criteria for the diagnosis of PTSD, and about 80% of multiple trauma survivors were no longer diagnosed with PTSD. So when we're using this bilateral stimulation within the context of EMDR, this really is part of the cure for PTSD. And my hypothesis is that we don't need PTSD in our world at all. In terms of, we will get PTSD after we go through trauma, but in our world, with the technology that we have and these tabs now that can democratize access to them, and there's methods outside of EMDR too that can desensitize stress very, very quickly. So even with different protocols outside of EMDR, using these tabs, we should be able to really eradicate PTSD. In other words, as soon as somebody has it, we can treat it. And we already have a way to do that with 100% accuracy or 100% efficacy. Next slide. And by the way, that last slide, these are statistics. They're from the Cochrane review. If you want to look at that, that has those statistics in there. I don't think there was a reference on that slide. Okay, I always get the question, so interesting. Why can't I just tap myself? And you can, right? You can tap yourself if you want. But your cerebellum contributes to the somatosensory cortical activity during self-produced tactile stimulation. In other words, you ever try to tickle yourself? It just doesn't feel quite the same, right? Or you can't. It's different because your brain anticipates movement and it anticipates the outcome. And so when you are tapping yourself, you're not getting the same effect as when you are getting this through vibration and device. Incidentally, the devices shouldn't be a hard tap either. That on an EEG does not produce it. I know there's some things on the market that are kind of like hard taps. That does not do the same thing. In fact, that can be agitating in about 20 to 30% of people. The other question I get is, well, my therapist taps me, or as a therapist, you tap. That does not produce the same response. My hypothesis is that because you can't get the rhythm, and also we've learned, I've done this with thousands and thousands of people. Most people, about 70% of people, will respond to a standard frequency. And that is in the preset frequencies in the tabs. It's the blue frequency. It's the middle one. About 70% of people will respond really well to that. But when they're in a state of high stress, they will respond more to the faster frequency. And when they're trying to calm down and there's not a lot of stimulation, they're not stressed out, but they just want to, more calm, they're going to respond a little bit better to the slower frequency. So as a therapist, if you're tapping, you have no idea what your client or your patient is responding to in that moment. And so there's no way to regulate that and also to get the rhythm. So I don't advocate when I'm training EMDR therapists. I don't advocate for tapping on the client. Next slide. Okay. This is kind of a heavy slide because, you have to be an EEG research to understand it. But what I want you to see is this is a change in brain function. So when we're looking at head maps like this on an EEG, we're looking for a mean change in function. And when we get a red color on this one, that means it's a hugely significant change. I mean, that would be like looking at somebody, who's 250 pounds and they lost 100 pounds. I mean, just huge magnitude of change. And when we look at where this is, we're seeing reduced activity in frontal theta. And in the frontal lobes, it's very important because when we get too much frontal theta, we get problems with attention, problems with focus. And we did have another study, it's unpublished, with Pearson's quotient. It's kind of they don't make it anymore, but it's an ADHD test. And we found that in about 50% of our sample with ADHD, the tabs actually improved, a bilateral stimulation, improved their focus significantly. And now we have EEG findings to kind of say, why. It also reduces activity in frontal lobes and beta, and that can be associated, beta and high beta frequencies are fast, and they can be associated with internal pressure, stress, anxiety, fight or flight, OCD, things like that. And so really significant changes. And a lot of other changes I won't go into, but I just wanted to give you a little highlight of the the cutting edge research that has been done that shows the actual mechanisms of action of bilateral stimulation. It's quite exciting. Next slide. We also, with EEGs are great right now, by the way, and we can get almost as precise as an fMRI with just EEG. So we can get statistical renderings of 3D maps. And when we looked at the actual kind of slices of this, we looked at the best match of where is this technology affecting the brain the most. And, winner, chicken dinner here, because if you can look on the right and it says the uncus, the amygdala, and Brodmann area 36, this was actually the best match of the biggest change in the brain with bilateral stimulation was actually in the amygdala at 5 hertz. And then at 14 hertz, it was Brodmann area 11, which is very, very important, that area in empathy, in social connection and things like that. And it makes sense, right? When you're in fight or flight and you're stressed out, you're not really connecting with people. If you think about couples and when they fight and they're stressed out, right? They're not connecting. They don't have, their empathy isn't coming through in that moment. Again, all things that are not important for survival shut down. And that includes the things that make us human, right? I'll never forget when I was deciding whether or not to pursue this, because I knew that if I came out and I was kind of a maverick and really came out on a platform and saying, hey, bilateral stimulation should be used out of the office, it should be doing this, I knew I was risking professional annihilation. And boy, I got it. I don't get it anymore, but 2016 was a little rough, right? But I had a mentor and he said to me, I think you need to do this. And I think that maybe your job in life, maybe your purpose is to help people de-stress so that they remember that they're kind. And that just hit me so hard. And when I saw this research on Brodmann area 11, I'm like, this is so important because this is your frontal lobe. And this is the area, incidentally, one of the areas that has problems developing in adoptive kids. And if we've got impaired area 11s, you can even get into things like sociopathy and, just complete lack of empathy and psychopathy. So really, really interesting that we look at people as kind of having fixed traits. But if I, as a human being, am really stressed out, I'm going to be rude to the person at Starbucks getting my drink, or I'm going to be, short with my kids, or I'm going to be doing these things. And so when we look at the state-dependent behaviors, this shifts it into now I'm in my humanity. Now I'm into my kindness. Now I'm not an angry, stressed out mess in this particular moment. And this bilateral stimulation has the ability to put people in that state in 30 seconds. It's a miracle. All right. Okay, next slide. This is research we published, and this was a really cool design. This was done out of the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was triple blind controlled cortisol research. So cortisol research is really hard to do, but you can take swabs, and we put people through, not we, but the researchers put people through the Trier social stress test. That's kind of the only ethical way we have of stressing people out now. They have to do mental math and a presentation in front of a panel of judges, enough to stress anyone out. So we're taking these cortisol measures at different times. And what we found with both the control group, they have tabs, but they've got bilateral stimulators on, but they don't have, they're not activated. It's what's called a sham condition. And so they don't know they're not getting it. And we have to do that in research because sometimes if you if people think they're getting a condition, they'll respond. And about 30% of the time. So that's why we have to have control groups. So we found that in doing the true social stress test, even with bilateral stimulation on them at the time, they still got stressed out. But the recovery was significantly different. In other words, someone's heightened and stressed while they're giving the presentation, not quite to the same level, but still stressed out. But afterwards, with the bilateral stimulation on, they recover so quickly, and it's anti-inflammatory to the body. And this is really important because when you're a therapist and you are using bilateral stimulation in the office and in EMDR, that's wonderful. But if your patients aren't using bilateral stimulation, like if they don't have a set of tabs and they're not using them just as they go about their day, we're really missing an opportunity, because their stress switch is going up and down, all throughout the day based on what's going on, right? They get a call from their kids, principal, and they're in trouble. Okay, now they're in fight or flight, or they get an email with some bad news, or they're in a conflict with one of their coworkers and that happens, or, their patient isn't doing well, something like that. All these things trigger us multiple times a day. And these are the opportunities to use bilateral stimulation to lower the stress switch. And, according to this study, actually come down quicker from a heightened state of stress. And then the brilliant part of that is that when you calm down that quickly from stress, it creates what we call a pattern interrupt. And that's what we're looking for in EMDR. When you think of this thing that happened, this car accident, let's say, and it's a 7 out of 10, and you get a stomachache when you think about it, and then your body signals you, I can't drive anymore. Okay. We want to pattern interrupt that. So the next time you think about that after a session of EMDR, it should be down to like 4 or 5, where it doesn't feel as bad. And then we work that down over time until it's not stressful at all. Okay. And that's what the healing is basically, is that pattern interrupt of the nervous system's activation in real time. So that's what we can do, though, just during the day, right? So if something happens and I get heightened and I add the tabs and lower my stress and lower my cortisol and lower my inflammation, it doesn't get locked into my memory networks. So we're essentially, by using it out of the office, we're preventing future EMDR targets from becoming EMDR targets, right? So they're just kind of taken care of in the moment, instead of letting it pile up and pile up and pile up. And now I have to go do EMDR. And by the way, I've suffered this whole time with this thing that's bothering me that I can't get over. So really, really profound here. Next slide. This is a recent research. It's not published. It's been presented or it's been submitted as a poster. But what we're looking at here is a case study of Brodmann Area 25, which has a lot of connectivity into the stress network and the salience network and the amygdala. But if you look at these circle graphs, this is what's kind of I'll go over. So you can't see these numbers, and that's okay. But these are all the areas of the Brodmann areas of the brain in the right and left hemispheres. And what we want is activity in the yellow highlighted area. And so you can see that this is just a person doing neurofeedback. And what we did was we gave them the tabs to regulate their brain, because then we could train their brain in a regulated state. And this is how quickly, this was about a few minute difference. And the only reason why it took a few minutes is we have to, in an EEG, we have to slice up data because there's artifact when people blink or when they move, and we have to make sure we have clean data because normally we can get a huge response in about 30 seconds. But in an EEG, we have to have about 5 minutes of data, enough to slice up to do a comparison. So it's about a 5 minute difference. And if you can look at how many more areas are in that yellow highlighted, and this is regulating areas all over the brain. And this study looked at area 25, but this is such great regulation that if I show this to researchers, they think that I had to do like 20 or 30 sessions of neurofeedback to get this effect, but this is an immediate effect. Now, it doesn't stay that way, because when you use the tabs and it downgrades the effect, there's always going to be certain things that are going to re-stress you out, right? So people always ask me, well, how long does it stay that way? And it's like, well, I don't know. If someone, if a fire alarm goes off, it's not going to stay that way very long, because the fire alarm is going to put you in fight or flight. Or if you come out of session and you get 15 messages from an an angry friend, you're going to go back up into fight or flight again. So remember, this is fluctuating in real time, but with the tabs, you have the power to regulate that in those moments. And when you think about the implications for sleep, this on the left, this is a person that if they lay in bed, in this state, they're not going to fall asleep. Their brain's going to be like this, that, the other, and they can try all the CBT things they want, but their nervous system is too dysregulated to go to sleep. But we use the tabs, and then a few minutes later, they're in a regulated state, and now they fall asleep naturally, because we have to kind of remind people, I think, in this day and age, that sleep is a natural state and your body really does want to sleep. There's just things that are getting in the way. And if we remove those as barriers, then it's a no-brainer, and we should be able to sleep just fine. So that's some really exciting new research, and we have more of that coming out. Next slide. This is just another EEG. And on the left, we don't want, if you just look at the front row here, or the top row, sorry, we don't want any yellow, orange, or red. That means too much activity. And the second head here is theta on the top row. And if you can look at the top row on the left versus the top row on the right, you can see that all that orange and yellow is gone on the top row. That shows that excess frontal theta, again, this is replicating another study that we have, and we can see it. We see it all the time. When we get too much theta, adding the tabs will wipe that out. This, we think, is the mechanism behind the improved focus. And there's other measures too down at the bottom. We don't want any lines, any red or blue lines. And if you can look at those and just see kind of the mean differences in that, it's pretty remarkable how the brain starts regulating. And this is an electrical chemical regulation. So this is how the brain is firing and wiring in real time. These images from EEG are functional. They're not structural. They're not like an X-ray or like an MRI where it's just showing certain things in the brain. This is actually showing how your brain is talking within itself and how it's firing and wiring in real time. So it's a functional map. So what we're doing is we're showing real time functional changes from the bilateral stimulation. And for the cost of, about one therapy session, to have this at your fingertips at, whenever you want, is just really, really remarkable. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is just a list of published and presented research. We don't have to go too much into this, but there is a lot of research, and, people ask me, well, if this is so great, why doesn't everybody know about this? And I'm like, well, big pharma isn't backing this, right? Like in our culture, chemicals have won. So we're pretty obsessed with chemicals and consciousness, right? So we're doing CBT and we're doing, medication and CBT and medication, but cutting edge neuroscience really has more to offer than that. In fact, we're using a lot of EEGs now to help psychiatrists really kind of look at the brain to help with their medication recommendations. When I say we, I'm talking about me and my clinic. I'm not talking about Dharma Doctor, okay? But we really want to actually look at the brain and look at what it's doing. And a lot of times we can get a much better effect just using the tabs than we can from some of the short-acting anti-anxiety medications. And again, Dharma Doctor is making no claims about that. I'm just speaking as an independent clinician on this one. But this is really, really a remarkable technology. And I hope that my presentation today has kind of laid out a little bit of the foundation of some of the research behind it and help explain some of the mechanism of actions. And with that, we can start taking questions from you all. And really, please, anything that you want to ask, really, this helps us with the community because this helps us know what you want and what you need from us and how we can be helpful.
All right, guys, that was amazing. Dr. Serin, thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and kick off the Q&A. So go ahead and submit your questions in the chat if you haven't already. So to get us started, from Jessica, we have, how does this compare to vagal nerve stimulation?
Okay, that's a great question. So vagal nerve stimulation comes in a lot of different forms, right? You can stimulate it with near infrared, you can stimulate it with electrical currents. And I actually just launched, Canyon Ranch just launched a Longevity 8 program. And Dharma doctors are a part of that program, and they didn't include vagus nerve stimulation because they've got a room where people go in and they try all these technologies. And about 30% of the people that are trying their vagus nerve stimulators that they have are having abreactions to them. So the vagus nerve is very complicated. When we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of like innervations into other parts of your body, and stimulating it can kind of be a little bit like a sledgehammer with some of the technologies because they're electrical and they're very invasive. And we don't know exactly, should we do the left and the right? How much? The dose is a little bit complicated. So it does work. Vagus nerve stimulation is really promising. I would say if you're going to use it, to use as non-invasively as possible with it, so that we're not overdoing it, because there may be a risk of some damage with too much electrical current. But it does work. It works more slowly. So I can't get a pattern interrupt from vagus nerve stimulation. In other words, if someone's stressed out about something and we do vagus nerve stimulation, and I have them in my office, by the way, so we do use them sometimes, but what happens is it works over a course of minutes, and I can't get the pattern interrupt. In other words, if someone's stressed and it's a 7 and they have a stomach ache and they have like a negative thought about themselves, and I use vagus nerve stimulation, that pattern interrupt does not happen the same way it happens with bilateral stimulation. And it also tends to be more expensive.
All right, for our next one, we have, does BLS mediated pattern interrupt outside of sessions create a dependency on the devices, or does the nervous system learn to respond without the stimulation? Thanks, Lionel.
That's a great question, Lionel. Thank you. So there's no dependency with these devices. And, I've been using them for, 15 years of wired and wireless. So you will need them less, and you won't need them in the same situations. So let's think of a situation that would stress, someone out. Like, let's say, you wake up and you have children, and one of your children is sick, and you've got, a really important day. Okay. And you're stressed out, right? If you use the tabs in that situation, then it's not that you need to keep using them. That kind of situation, and if you're an EMDR therapist, it generalizes, right? Like if you fix someone's phobia of one thing and they're phobic of something else, that other phobia will get desensitized too. So everything's connected, right? So you won't need the tabs then in that same kind of situation. That's what a pattern interrupt is. So a lot of people, if they're very anxious, they'll use them very heavy in the beginning. I mean, I've had people use them like all day, right? They have 2 sets and they just kind of continuously use them. That's very extreme. But then over time, they need them less and less. And then the question is, well, then how long do they need them for? Well, we all still have a functioning stress system. So you're going to have situations that bring your stress levels up. Now, maybe they're going up to a 5 instead of a 10 all the time with a lot of use and EMDR and things, but you actually will need them typically less and less if you're using them appropriately, and it doesn't create dependency. It's not a chemical. So not robbing Peter to pay Paul. Anytime we actually gently stimulate the system into responding a certain way, that doesn't create dependency.
All right, let's see. For our next question from Craig McGuire, we have, I am not EMDR trained. Is there a way to use the tabs for self-treatment for my own trauma and ADHD, and also with my hypnotherapy clients without being EMDR trained?
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah, so you can use the tabs outside of the context of EMDR. In fact, this is why they're safe as a consumer product, because people can just open them up, find a frequency that they like, and use them to help them with stress. And for people that it helps focus, it can help them with focus. Other kinds of therapists, you mentioned hypnotherapy, you can absolutely use them in hypnotherapy. Cognitive behavioral therapists can use them in the context with cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is just, I wanted to coin the term, tech-assisted blank. So tech-assisted CBT, tech-assisted hypnotherapy, tech-assisted whatever. These are safe to use. There's only a very, very small subset of the population that will have abreactions from these. Usually they've got severe trauma. and are very sensory reactive, or some people on the autism spectrum are very sensory reactive to things and they don't like the feeling. And so you have to introduce it to them in a certain way. But for the general population, you can use that. In terms of your own trauma, you can use them when your trauma gets triggered to just desensitize your nervous system reactivity. And there's a book by the founder of EMDR, Francine Shapiro, called Getting Past Your Past. And she goes through a way to do self EMDR. I wouldn't just try it. And then trying to just jump in and do EMDR on your own. But that book can be a guide once you're through some things. But I would probably, if the trauma is significant, and especially if it was from childhood, I would definitely start with, EMDR therapy. But then once you're kind of cleared, you're safe to do that on your own. But for those of you who aren't doing EMDR, we all have trauma, right? And if you're upset and you just notice you're upset, you can apply the tabs and it will bring that level of upset down. And over time you do this, it will become less and less upsetting, even outside of the office.
All right, from Lionel, we have some devices offer tapping, short bursts versus vibration. Is there a difference in efficacy, and which does Dharma Doctor support?
Thanks again, Lionel, for this other question. Yeah, the tapping doesn't work very well in my EEG research. It tends to kind of reorient people and be a little too much. There's something about, and I don't know the mechanism of this, but there's something about how the vibration overlaps and the frequency of it and the intensity of it that's very, very important. And the tappers, I don't know if there's new tappers that I haven't used yet that you can, modulate the actual intensity of the tapping. But even if there is that hard tap gap, it does not have the same effect on EEG in the brain. And so I don't use them. I don't recommend them. And they actually can cause a lot more agitation without the ability then to bring somebody down from that. And the Dharma Doctors are actually vibrations, smooth vibrations, and there's multiple frequencies, intensities, and speeds that you can choose from.
And I'll just say this really quickly, that right now the tabs facilitate it's left, right, it's back and forth, and there's no gap in between.
Right.
Eventually, we may facilitate the ability to do a gap, but it's not high on our priority list. I know some people have put that into our community feedback for feature improvements. And this is one of the reasons why, because the EEG data actually supports it to be better if it is just continuous.
Yeah, the EEG does not support a gap, by the way. So
okay.
Mind the gap, right? I know we're not in London, but yeah, mind the gap.
All right, from Mary, we have, can BLS be helpful for people with autism?
Mary, this is a great question. And there was a study done in the UK on bilateral stimulation. They had behavioral analysts at a school for kids on the spectrum, on autism spectrum. And they did a week of a sham condition and a week without. And they found I think it was a 77% reduction in what we call fight or flight behaviors. So one child banged his head on a desk the first week with about 186 times, I think it was. And the second week it was down to 17 times. One child was hiding under the desk repeatedly and stopped doing that. One child would run out of the room and do it. Eye contact improved. We actually learned, when I was doing the research a long time ago in 2016, 2017, kids with autism were some of the first adopters of the wireless bilateral stimulators. And we used to actually, when the wired versions were there, we'd put them in hip packs and they would run out 9-volt batteries. They'd go through like a 9-volt battery a day. It was so bad for the environment. But the teachers could tell when the batteries would die because the kids would start stimming again. They would lose eye contact after a few minutes of it going. So there's a very huge regulating effect on kids with autism. And we know we can diagnose autism from just looking at the salience network in an EEG. There's a group out of Berkeley that can do this. The salience network is very impaired in kids with autism. And when you're regulating it, with bilateral stimulation, then they're not going into fight or flight because the lights changed or because there was a noise or because these things are happening. And it's a profound effect on this population. Just we need to be careful when we're first introducing it that we don't create a sensory abreaction, because new things and sensory stimulation in the beginning, you know, I tell parents, okay, it's kind of like going into a movie theater and it's really loud at first, but then if you stay, you know, your ears kind of, you get used to it. And that's the same thing, but we have to introduce it a little carefully sometimes.
All right. Let's see here. There's so many great questions, guys. Thank you so much. See, we have one from Jennifer here. I work with adults with a variety of disabilities, and we've been using bilateral stimulation tapping. This has helped so many of my residents feel a sense of calmness, and some crave this feeling now and now request tapping during group sessions. Since this is new to me and not being a certified EMDR therapist, I was wondering if I need to be cautious of how much time they do the tapping. Can it be too much? We just use the sounds now, but I have the pods on the way. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. I think you're going to get a much better response moving to the tactile stimulation from the sounds. That's great. I don't think you need to worry about it being too much. So the only thing when it's too much is someone will know. So if I have them on to calm me down and they produce the calm effect, and I'm trying to talk or read or do something and focus, there is a point sometimes at which I'm already calm. I don't need them anymore. And now they might be a little bit distracting. So I want to turn them off. So if people use them, they might say at some point, okay, I don't need these anymore. You can tell because you'll have that feeling if you have any interoceptive abilities at all. But for people that have heightened anxiety or heightened stress, you know, like we're talking about kids on the spectrum, on autism spectrum, they're typically in fight or flight a lot. They will want them a lot, and you really don't need to worry about doing that. But if you've got a kid and they get stressed out about homework and you put them on and they calm down and now they can focus on their homework, they might not want them after more than a few minutes, and that's okay too. You can kind of go by how they feel, but you don't have to worry. This is not a chemical, right? It can't go too far. I've not had any, you know, I mean, if you take like an anti-anxiety, let's say someone takes a Xanax, that can absolutely go too far, right? But this is different because it won't take away all of your stress. It'll get you down to, you know, a level 2, a level 3, sometimes a 1 or a 0, but there's no way for it to go too far because it's just adding an input and your brain is deciding what to do with it. So there's a protective factor because it's not a chemical.
All right, I'm going to jump in and read this next one because I think this is an important one. Jacob, thank you for the question. Jacob wrote, I've been told that tactile BLS may cause disassociation if the speed or intensity is too jarring. Can you speak to that as a concern or outcome? And more broadly, the topic of disassociation comes up a lot.
Yeah, we knew this would come up.
Talk a lot about, yeah.
So, yeah, and Sandra and Paulson and I go round and round about this, but she's a believer now. In fact, we wrote an article together. We haven't published it yet, but so the thing about dissociation is that I'm not that concerned with it, because if this is going to bring about dissociation, it will come and go. Just like if someone holds the tabs and then it's jarring at first, then the sensations start to calm them down. It may spike and go down. So this is actually protective for someone that's dissociating. And we've not had, so different bilateral stimulators. So the wired versions have been used in offices for over 30 plus years, right? And the wireless versions have been out for, 2024, like 8 years now, 7, 8 years now. And there have been no instances of things like seizures, which we had that cleared. I had that cleared in the beginning anyway with some experts. So seizures, dissociation, anything like that. And these have been used by thousands and thousands of people, even outside of the office, unsupervised, things like that. So I'm just not concerned with it. And I haven't seen it, even with my dissociative clients. Having that by themselves is actually incredibly helpful. In fact, it brings them out of dissociation. When you think about what dissociation is, right? It's on the stress switch. It's on the continuum. It's just, it's we think of it as like a freeze response. And so taking somebody out of the freeze response is similar to taking somebody out of the fight or flight response. It's right. It's all the same. It's all the same switch. If you think about it that way, it's just a different way that the brain reacts to stress or to a trigger. So it actually can help bring people out of dissociation. And there was one other part real quick about that question. And that is if the speed or intensity is too jarring, as we're finding this out, sometimes the speed or intensity is too much and people go, ooh, this is too much. Then you just lower it immediately. And it works so fast that you can bring someone down. And then that's the issue with the vagus nerve stimulation. If you put an electrical current right here and kind of zap someone with it, and then their sympathetic system is activated, you have no way with that technology to calm them down from that. So this you do, because you just go on another intensity and there will be one that calms them down.
Brad, I think this might be a good one for you. Have you considered coming out with wristbands or holders so that you can be hands-free?
Thank you, Audrey. Yes. So in the background, we are working on a couple additional not devices, but mostly accessories. One of them is wristbands. We're also working on a light bar version where it's going to hold the tabs on the magnets. If you go into your current settings in the app, you have the ability under advanced to turn off the vibration or turn off the lights. So you do have, and that can be used for sleep or a time where you didn't want to use either, or if you wanted to pair them with another form of bilateral stimulation, you can modulate that. But both of these, especially the wristbands, are things that we're working on in the future. There were a couple other questions about some feature development that I'll just comment on quickly. One was about EMDR 2.0 I saw, and the use of complex tapping in order to facilitate or work the tax the working memory. We will continue to explore and expand the pattern availability in the tabs. That's all going to be made possible by firmware updates, and we released one firmware update. Hopefully everybody's utilized it, that improved some of the connection strength. In the future, this will also enable greater variability in some of these mechanisms. So yes, it is on our pipeline. It is on our product development list, and I think those were the other major questions about product features. So.
Exciting.
Someday. The short answer is someday. I don't have a firm date on when they'll be delivered, but it is a goal.
All right. I know we're getting close on time. We can maybe run over a couple minutes, but we do want to be mindful of everybody's time here. Here we have another one from Audrey. It seems like these devices could be really helpful for ADHD focus. Have you found that these tabs can be used for studying?
Yeah. And this is the research on, that frontal theta, in the EEG research. And then one that we did with kids with ADHD that's not published, where it did help in about 50% of the sample. It doesn't help everyone focus because it depends on what in the brain is modulating focus. But if, especially for people who are, have heightened anxiety or they've got too much, frontal theta is the issue, then it appears that those are the mechanisms. And during studying, it can help. But like I said, there's some people get to the point where they're studying and now they're focused and calm and they don't need them anymore. And then they're like, okay, I don't like this sensation for a moment. And then they turn them off. We also have people using them during tests. There's, and that's the comment I made before where, you go into fight or flight in a test and you don't have access to your memories. And right, we have research that shows that it improves memory. And when you're studying, that's helpful too, because if I'm stressed out and I'm studying, I'm not consolidating these memories. The information I'm looking at doesn't get in. I think we've all had that experience where we're stressed out and we read a whole paragraph and we're like, that was like the Charlie Brown teacher in words talking. It was like, I don't even know what I read. And then you need to come down from the stress and then reread it. But if you're studying in a state of stress, your memory consolidation isn't happening. It's not even getting into the memory correctly, right? And then if you're stressed out when you're taking a test or trying to recall or trying to link things together, like in complicated math, you can't access the old stuff to even pattern it into the new. So it's very helpful.
All right, from Larry O'Reilly, can you comment on the unique difference between the tabs and, for example, EMDR kit pulsars? I've had no time to fully appreciate the tabs, but look forward to. Just finished the first session with an ASD child, eyes avoidant, and just on allowing him to hold them on low level. Could see him panting.
Yeah, I know what he means.
Got it.
I know what Larry means. Hi, Larry. Okay, so the EMDR kit pulsars are they work, okay, but they're a looser vibration, and that loose vibration doesn't really seem to have as good of an effect as a smooth vibration. They still do work. They're better than like the hard tappers for sure, but the smooth vibration seems to be more effective.
I am going to jump in because it is 11 o'clock, and I just want to say, thank you. I think good meetings start on time and end on time, and so we're gonna cut it off. But thank you for all the amazing questions. We're gonna host these monthly, so we'll do another one on January 14th. Will be the next date for anybody that's interested in attending. Obviously, there's lots more to talk about, so we would love to dive in. We'll also continue to send updates via the newsletter. For those who are interested in their current shipment of tabs, thank you for your patience. They are en route. They've landed in the US. They are coming to the office this week. And as soon as we receive them, we'll send them out. So it's still our hope that everybody will receive them before Christmas. But thank you for your patience with that. And just thank you for your support. This has been a pretty amazing journey so far, and we're really excited about the next steps. Dharma Doctor is really just getting started, and we're here to facilitate and support amazing individuals like yourselves in whatever part of the mental health journey you're on, and the work you do with others. So it means the world to us. We believe in this. It's much more than just a startup in a lot of ways. Like this is a passion, and it's doing good for the world. So thank you all for joining us on this journey. It's much appreciated. So, and huge thank you to Dr. Serin as well for taking the time and joining us and being here today. And we look forward to seeing you all in January. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you all so much. And I just wanted to drop one more comment that if we did not get to your questions, thank you so much. We will follow up via email, okay? Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.